The storm raged across the surface of Keth Prime with the fury of a dying god. Lieutenant Jake Morrison pressed himself against the rocky outcropping, his environmental suit's readings flashing warnings he'd learned to ignore. Radiation levels that would kill most galactic species in minutes, atmospheric pressure that could crush a Centaurian's exoskeleton, and temperatures that swung from Arctic to volcanic without warning. Just another day on humanity's newest colony world. What the other species called a Deathworld, humans simply called challenging. Through the howling wind, Jake heard something that made his blood freeze. Not the storm, but a sound that didn't belong. A high, keening cry that spoke of pain and terror. He activated his helmet's audio filters, cutting through the atmospheric chaos. There, again, something small and alive was in distress. Following the sound, Jake climbed over jagged obsidian formations that would have shredded any unprotected flesh. His suit's servo assisters hummed as he hauled himself up a particularly brutal cliff face, the kind of terrain that made other species question human sanity. In a shallow cave, barely visible through the driving sleet of liquid methane and crystallized oxygen, Jake found the source of the cries. A Veltar cub, no bigger than a human child, cowered beside the still form of what must have been its parent. The adult Veltar's scaled hide was split open, revealing the silvery blood that was already freezing in the brutal cold. Jake had seen Veltar before the space stations. Beautiful creatures, like a cross between Earth's ancient dragons and modern birds, with iridescent scales and wing membranes that caught light like stained glass. They were peaceful traders, known for their artistic talents and gentle disposition. They were also notoriously fragile, adapted to warm, stable worlds with carefully controlled atmospheres. This cub shouldn't have been able to survive 5 minutes on Keth Prime. Yet here it was, shivering violently but alive, its large violet eyes tracking Jake's movements with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. When it tried to cry out again, only a weak chirping emerged from its throat. Jake didn't hesitate. He activated his suit's emergency protocols, creating a small atmospheric pocket around them both. The environmental field hummed to life, pushing back the worst of the storm and raising the temperature to something the cub could survive. But it wouldn't last long. His suit's power cells were already draining at an alarming rate. "Easy there, little one," Jake murmured, though he doubted the cub understood standard. He pulled out his emergency heat pack, one of 3 he carried for extreme survival situations. Without thinking, he cracked it open and placed it near the trembling creature. The cub's eyes widened as warmth began to spread through the small space. It crept closer to the heat source, its scales gradually shifting from dull gray to faint hints of blue and gold. Jake's suit beeped a warning. Power at 60%. The storm showed no signs of abating, and he was still 40 kilometers from the nearest human settlement. By all logical calculations, he should leave the cub and save himself. Any other species would. It was simple survival mathematics. Instead, Jake cracked his second heat pack. The cub made a sound, softer now, almost purring. It looked up at Jake with those enormous violet eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or simply recognition that sometimes survival wasn't about mathematics. Jake activated his emergency beacon and settled in to wait. His suit's heating system worked overtime to maintain the atmospheric pocket as the storm raged outside. With each passing hour, his power levels dropped. 40%, 20, 10. The cub had fallen asleep against his leg, its tiny body warm and breathing steadily. When the rescue team finally found them 18 hours later, they discovered something that would become legend among both species. A human, nearly comatose from hypothermia and radiation exposure, his suit's power completely drained. And curled against his chest, very much alive and glowing with health, a Veltar cub that should have died a dozen times over. The rescue team's medic, Dr. Patricia Wells, shook her head as she worked to stabilize Jake. "You could have died," she told him later in the medical bay. Jake glanced over at the cub, now safely housed in a proper environmental chamber and already showing signs of recovery. The little creature pressed one tiny hand against the transparent wall whenever Jake looked its way. Yeah, Jake said quietly, but I didn't. And that, the rescue team agreed, was the most human response possible. The Veltar later named the cub Storm-Touched, and its rescue became a story told throughout their trading fleets. But they used a different name for Jake Morrison, Deathwalker who gives life. Humans, they learned, didn't just survive Deathworlds. Sometimes, they made them a little less deadly for others.